Welcome to another episode of Changing the Tide. I've got Kassa today of bitcoinbur.org and an Ethiopian businessman. And Cal, excited to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, John. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I first heard of you actually back at the Bitcoin 2021 when Elizabeth Stark said your name and talked about some of the work you were doing. So excited to dive into that. Couple days ago, you
Absolutely,
had
absolutely.
a tweet about your uncle who seems to be this Ethiopian hero, and I would love to hear that story just within the wider context of Ethiopia over the past 50, 60 years as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, that was a tweet from about 3 days ago, and I actually on about one day a month there are some bit dev meetings here in Austin, and so and then after those meetings, right, we usually go have barbecue, we'll go out, and so that tweet actually came about after a discussion I had with two of the guys I met at the conference, at the meeting. And yeah, it's anyone that has a chance to go on Twitter and check it out, there are some kind of gruesome details behind it, and much like the story of the Derg and kind of the communist past, it's very violent, and a lot of people perished, and on many sides. And I think it's even fair to say that the sides were so confused that sometimes you don't know who you're fighting, and there's the government at the time. So in 1974, the emperor falls, and the people usher in Haile Mariam Mengistu, and you know from 1974 to 1991, there were large amounts of kind of death going back and forth. So you say the Red Terror, and then the Red Terror led to the White Terror, and and during that time there are also kind of international things going on. So I think there's a kind of a war front with Somalia, but through that, it's very unfortunate, but my uncle does pass away, and so yeah, that was the tweet from 3 years ago, and yeah, it's gotten a lot of attention.
Well,
I'm sorry, three days ago, the tweet from 3 days ago.
as it should, and we'll dive into just that overall history as it relates to money and probably Africa in general, but specifically Ethiopia as well. Um, Out of curiosity, was that within the time period that your family made the migration to the United States? That 74 to
So
91?
my family left Ethiopia in 1994. It definitely took some time, and I think there's something to be said that my father was a private sector guy for all of his life. So he worked in the oil and gas kind of exploration industry, and I don't think there was any reason for him to come at odds with any of these groups. It's only if you're like my uncle Bokatsu, who openly challenged the government, right? And I think he was, I think it's 120 or 100 of kind of the top generals kind of make up the administration, right? And so if you don't fall in line as a member, you're of course seen as an outcast, and then things might happen to you, right? If you're not supporting them, you're against them, and so yeah, thankfully my father, he led a very private sector life, and so yeah, he was able to work, under first some Americans and then some Russians, and so yeah, there was, unfortunately my immediate family was unharmed in all of this.
And then you made the migration in 94 to, it sounds like Silicon Valley, right? San Jose. So,
Yeah, yeah. So our first stop was actually San Diego. Just the way our visa worked, my uncle was in San Diego. He's the one that hosted us, invited us over, and so we stayed with him for a couple of months, and then migrated over to San Jose.
so what was that like, growing up? It sounds like you were about 3 years old at that point, and
Yeah, I was 4 years old by the time I came into the United States.
so you were kind of moving right into that school age, new country. What do you remember of your childhood? I guess in the United States, you know, is it kind of murky, hard to remember, or is it very vivid?
Yeah, I mean, I can remember the important bits, right? So us coming out here and beginning to live in the U.S. Obviously, it's a culture shock for anyone, right? Both on the language and it's a new front. You have to make new friends. You have to find a new church. All of these things. And so less for me. I'm a kid. I don't notice things, right? You just kind of go along. But I think more for my parents. There's definitely a large learning curve, and you're even tested at some point, right? So when they were becoming citizens, X years after they lived here, there's a test, to be American, right? There's like 100 questions, how many stars and stripes, and some basics about the Bill of Rights and Constitution and things like that. So, aside from just having to learn and adapt, I think our move to California was actually very good and successful. And so yeah, my childhood was great, and California was great, definitely in those times, right? So, 20 years ago. Now it's probably a little. I wouldn't live there now, but definitely when I grew up and where I grew up in San Jose, it was a really good environment.
Where was that by chance? My wife and I lived in both South San Jose and Santa Clara for a few years. So
Yeah, so that's exactly right. Yeah, so Blossom Hill and kind of Pearl and Branham, if you know any of those areas. We lived near Almaden Lake. I went to Pioneer
oh
High
yeah,
School. Yeah,
okay,
yeah, yeah. So class
uh,
of 2009.
cool, cool. Well, so I'm hearing you come from Ethiopia. You get to San Diego. You're up in San Jose. Out of curiosity, is there anything in your childhood that maybe laid a groundwork for a later just discovery of Bitcoin and your Bitcoin aha moment, or did that come later?
So it probably came later. I mean, I'm relatively new to this game, but I think something that it got me in, easy, and everything just kind of clicked was, so after Pioneer, I went to Chapman University in Orange County. So, and I don't know if you're familiar with Orange County or maybe university, but it's very Austrian, and they have a lot of I guess they call it the Chicago boys. Actually, there's so at Chapman University, in one of the libraries, there is a Milton and Rose Friedman library. So there's like a little corner of Leatherby Library, and that's actually where a lot of their personal books are kept, right? Just I think they donated it to the university, and you can read them. So me and my buddies would, we were a bit of nerds, right? We would, Dylan and Dan, like we would go in and read these books, and they actually had messages from Milton Friedman, like yeah, just as you would read in any book that's secondhand, right? And so yeah, I had an early understanding of I would say monetary policy and how they can go awry, and how we've been ever since leaving the gold standard, things haven't gone right. So I knew that, and I'm glad I studied that, and I'm glad I had that early upbringing. Um, but unfortunately, as I was seeing Bitcoin around, I never really had a chance to work with it. I never purchased any. I never, learned about it. So it just kind of all went over my head. And it wasn't until maybe 2 years ago now that, I started kind of working with it. And, this past year, and, that might be also pretty interesting. But, what's been happening in Ethiopia this past year, right? So we're having similar ebbs and flows, and and so I had to leave the country. So I was in Ethiopia from 2013 up until 2020. So yeah, my Bitcoin story is a bit odd because the moment I discovered Bitcoin, right, it just made sense. It was like, okay, so this is the thing that makes the free market work, because of course I want to believe in free market disciplines and how the invisible hand takes care of it all and things like that. But in the old way of doing things, when you have manipulators print and inflate and manipulate, then the free market doesn't work, So then that's why, I would say after college, I actually probably had a different route than I do now. And so now I feel like everything kind of makes sense. The Austrian school that I learned in Chapman, and then kind of this Bitcoin scarcity based upon decentralized, nodes. I mean, so putting those things together, I was like, okay, now things make sense.
Yeah. I mean, what it sounds like from some things I've read in your tweets is you had to leave Ethiopia because they basically shut
Yeah,
off the internet in response to, was it protests? Tell us more about
yeah.
that.
So, and this is the story of Africa and unfortunately Ethiopia too. There's been a lot of uh, things to fight for. And so, last June, June 2020, there was an assassination. He was a kind of an artist, activist, musician, Hachalu Hundessa. So, when he passed, the next day, the internet was gone, and a lot of it was the rainy season, and so a lot of the electricity was gone. The roads were blocked. There were protests on the streets, and this is in the capital, Addis Ababa, where I live. And so yeah, I mean, this was done, as a government attempt to kind of quell uprising. And so, the fifth day of that kind of lockdown, and you got to imagine we're already in lockdown, we're already working from home, and so the fifth day, I left. I left Ethiopia, and that internet blockage ended up continuing for like 3 weeks. So so that's kind of how I said, all right, let me go back to the States. And California wasn't as attractive as Texas, and I have a brother here, and I have some family here, so it just kind of made sense to come out to Austin, Texas. And the Bitcoin community here is really strong, um, probably second to none. So in terms of me learning and kind of contributing and being with developers and all of these things, Austin has really made sense for now.
Yeah, you really have some Bitcoin legends there in Austin.
Yeah, yeah.
And you probably get to meet with them at the BitDevs meetups.
Yeah, and it's funny because sometimes of course I follow them on Twitter, Clubhouse. I'm speaking to them, but I don't know what they look like. So it's like sometimes I'm sitting right next to them and I have no idea who is who. Because we all have like different ninja names and anon names and all of that. So, but yeah, they're all here, or they'll come here, or they'll visit and all of that.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Well, yeah, so as we kind of transition in, you've created this uh, Bitcoin Bur kind of open source initiative. And so maybe time to dive in of why Bitcoin and why for Ethiopia.
Yeah, so
Let's start that discussion.
absolutely. I mean, uh, it's so Bitcoin, burr.org. It's a place to go and learn. So essentially, it's a repository of information, lessons, translated material, and the idea is getting it into as many Ethiopian languages, Eritrean languages, and then everything else will kind of fill in. And why does Bitcoin work or be adopted into Ethiopia? I think it really depends who you're asking. Me, I would say the inflation is kind of our biggest challenge. So not having complete sovereignty over our value, right? And sometimes that's because of external reasons, right? Things we can, there's nothing we can do. as a country, right? You have the Fed print, or the IMF give, and that kind of messes around with the free market. And so from that standpoint, I think it would be a lot easier to have a money in place that is almost similar to gold, but much better, right? Because it's digital, and kind of easier to ship, and all of these things, and easier to secure, and insurance, and all of these things. So, for many reasons, Bitcoin makes sense in Ethiopia. And then I have my reason, which is, I use it for my business. So, I've been seeing it as a medium of exchange, right? And every now and then when the price goes up, I kind of like go, oh wow, because what I sent yesterday, is actually a great deal, right, compared into dollar costs. So it's humbling, right? But at the same time, it's like it's a part of the way this is going to mature. And yeah, it's absolutely scarce. And if you only use it as a store of value, that's fine, right? Use whatever else. Use Venmo for everything else, right? But in Ethiopia, I see so many advantages to that, and keeping within the law. So, I never tell anybody to break the law. And so there were some tweets coming out me last week, and I'm like, look, don't break the law. Easy as that. I'm not going to advise anybody to break the law, but you should learn. Learn as much as possible wherever you are, and I think test transactions like of 10, 20 cents. They're an accountant told me immaterial, or not material, right? They're not significant enough to cause some sort of large change in your balance sheet, right? So take 10 cents, learn about it, see how it works, see if you can develop on it, make it good for your country. And yeah, so the Ethiopia case, as well as the Eritrea case, the Nigeria case, El Salvador, um, all of these countries, they'll have their own way of adopting it, but I think it will be adopted. So it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, if you're lucky enough to have been born into, let's say, the United States or the UK or somewhere that has a relatively stable currency, at least it's not being inflated at the rate that others are, then Bitcoin as a store of value is an incredible thing, and you don't necessarily need it as that medium of exchange on the daily.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But in places like Ethiopia, for instance, what do they use as stores of value, since the currency probably isn't going to be the one that's going to store it for them?
Yeah, yeah. So it's actually a mad rush because you have inflation. I mean, think about if inflation is 5 to 10% in America, it's significantly higher in Ethiopia, right? 15 to 20, maybe even higher. So um, the question, the moment you get a little bit of Ethiopian bird, is where do I put that, right? How can I make that grow, and not really grow, just so you're at par with the consumer prices that happen a year from there, right? So at that point, if you're
Right.
lucky enough and you have enough of that initial capital, you would buy property, um, because the idea is land is land. But even that, there is some confusion about exactly who owns the land within kind of the Ethiopian structure. So, of course, you own the land, but it's more of a lease. That's a very long-term lease, but the bank will see that as an asset, right? And then from there, you might buy some machinery, depending on your business, you might kind of go into services or trading. And there are a lot of smart, apt Ethiopian business people purely because they have to keep innovating, right? At a factor of like 20% a year. So
Yeah.
it's like, and it's not like they're increasing their wealth, right? They're simply just staying on par, right? Can we afford the same things we did last year, right? And and
Yeah.
so and then I guess if you have kind of a smaller amount, you might buy a car, and so that's why cars, even a broken 20-year-old Vitz, right? will cost you $10,000 worth of Ethiopian birr, right? Or so, and then gold, right? If you're brave enough to have a safe in your house and all of these things, and then also the illegal thing to do, especially for Ethiopian nationals, right? I'm quite lucky; I can go back and forth. But if buying dollars, right? So you can't own dollars in Ethiopia unless you have different licenses and things like this. So yeah, you know, it's I'm finally waking up here, and I think you're you're asking me the questions that are like riling me up, and which is inflation is our biggest burden as a country and as our people, right? And so how do you solve that? My solution is Bitcoin. Like I've said that as loudly as I can. There's always dissent. Like in the morning I got up and I'm looking at my Twitter, and there's you know, already people kind of, upset with me, right? Which is fine. That's good, right? And kind of the pressure will make the diamond, right? But um, but yeah,
Yep.
for me, looking as at to any comparable, right? Let's bring in gold, let's bring in dollar, let's bring in yen, and the ruble and the rupee, and let's talk about how do we, because I mean, what Bitcoin is doing, it's like it's capturing energy, right? Your energy, or the world's energy, and putting it in a kind of a sendable and tradable and non-fungible item, right? And it works, and it's decentralized, and there's never been anything like that. So I think with the issue of inflation, you're gonna have very natural solutions. And the last documentary I saw was about kind of the mushrooms and the mycelium, and kind of like how organisms grow and develop and heal, and they die, and then they kind of reborn through spores and all of these things, right? So you know, looking at that, Bitcoin is kind of its own little mycelium network, right? And the kind of the fungi, will kind of heal itself, and people will, find a way to retain their value. And God bless Satoshi, right? Whoever he is, or she is, or they are, or whatever. But yeah, it's only the most natural solution. It's the most peaceful solution. I think it's very ethical too. Like because I have to admit I'm not too interested in money. Like money is great. I need it to survive. I would rather have it and store it than not. But like what really attracted me to this conversation was it feels very ethical, and it feels very clean. And because sometimes you'll go into different businesses, or you'll buy some shares or certificate, something, and then you kind of you see the business and you see the profit, and it's not done in a way where it's good for society, right? On a net positive, it's actually taking us backwards, right? And I think there's many examples of that. But with Bitcoin, it's purely for your friends and your enemies, and it's for everybody, and you don't have to use it, right? And so it's just it's been a beautiful thing. So yeah, Bitcoin is going to be that solution for Ethiopia's headaches.
And really, because of the just demographics alone, as far as age, I read one of your articles and you mentioned a nation of 120 million people, thereabouts, right?
Yep, yep.
75% of whom are under 27 or under. Is that
Something like the 70 or
like,
75% are under the age of 27. Yes.
and then the growth in usage of being online. Let's just say that online growth has gone from 5 million when you showed up to Ethiopia again to by the time you left it was like almost a quarter,
Absolutely. Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's so
So
I think
the
they're yeah, yeah. No, no. I just yeah. So I just want to like meditate on that point, because it's actually an amazing thing. Like so now we have about 25% of our population online. Like when I got there 8 years ago, it was like 5%, 6%. So Ethiopians have
Wow.
been working really hard. Whatever you see online and like the social media bit and all of that, like take it with a grain of salt, right? Ethiopians have been building out infrastructure, have been putting phones into the hands of people, and have been continuously beating inflation, right? That's how we're still around. And not only have we been beating inflation, we're flourishing, right? If you look at our capital, I mean, there's a lot of capital there. There is a lot of hard work there. At the same time, we're fighting wars, right? I mean, on the digital front, there are kind of all of these clashes that go on amongst our regions, and so I it's a very young population. They work really hard, and so that even kind of accelerates me even more and kind of saying, all right, they should really have something of value at the end of the day. So yeah, our population and our telecom rate is going to be kind of an easy win for us as long as we can keep it going and share the internet with everybody.
Yeah. Well, it's really cool that you had some time to spend back at Chapman learning about Austrian economics, because that was a lot of what just prepared my mind, is the idea of we're so steeped in this other way of thinking, right? Like Keynesianism, print, 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 we can cover our costs, that sort of thing. And maybe the government can cover their costs by doing that, but your average everyday Joe can't do that, right? They've got to find these, like you're saying, Ethiopians are doing, find these really innovative ways. And it brings me to one of those Twitter conversations that you and I both latched onto yesterday. Neel Kashkari of the Minneapolis Fed, I think it was the Bittrex CEO, that mentioned how he was basically spreading FUD about digital currencies, and Neil comes back and said, "Okay, name me, how crypto is what he said is actually helping people have better lives, right?"
Yeah.
and instead of just this pump and dump scheme. And so, what do you think it is this blindness to this real problem of inflation on the ground? Where do you think that comes from?
So, I think with his tweet specifically, he's making two assumptions, or he's making two mistakes. The first is crypto, right? So the moment you say crypto, it talks about a lot of stuff, right? And you can't necessarily have a good point talking about a lot of stuff, right? It would
That's
be
a good
like,
point.
yeah, yeah. So automatically he's kind of confused the argument, and I don't think he's doing it intentionally. I think he's just doing it from a place of, I don't know. He's just probably not as eager to learn about the details as others, right? So so I think he's made that mistake. So talking about Bitcoin, which is probably most important to the communities he's dealing with and the communities that I'm dealing with, it's been lifting many people out of poverty. So uh, now he can look at those numbers from kind of a global perspective and say, okay, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, why are they leading, right? How are they mining, and how long so he can easily calculate those numbers himself, but I think it comes from a place of these are probably not the communities he's most, I want to say, like, be sensitive, but like he doesn't know those communities, right? He doesn't know me. He's probably never been to many of these countries, and so that aside, even with his own country, right, the United States, the kind of the Fed and kind of the communities that he's set up to manage, right? I highly doubt he knows what's going on in Detroit, right? Or he knows what's going on in some of these like cities that are almost forsaken at this point, right? And so, like, how much time does he spend down there, right? And if he did, he'd probably see that, like, if he got in and out alive, right? Like, he would see exactly what the world is going through, right? Because even in America, like there's like this opioid addiction, right? So The homeless have kind of, there is an issue. Like I don't know what the issue is. I'm not, here to solve it, but there's an issue, and if he doesn't see that it's because of inflation and because life gets continually harder, and you have profiteers sell very ugly items, right? And often those are kind of in cahoots with bureaucrats and people of the system, profiting from kind of just being specific, the opioid crisis, right? And so I look at that, and I see it as laughable because one, he's not talking about Bitcoin, and two, I don't think this is a community that he's in tune with. So I would just urge him to go into some of these communities and see exactly what their major headache is. I will love to take him to Ethiopia if he needs an international perspective, and why we need hard money and why we're not considering any soft money. Ethereum is not a part of this conversation. Centralized, manipulated coins and tokens are not a part of this conversation. I mean, they can be if you want to be silly, right? If you want to like talk about non-fungible tokens and art, right? I mean, that's a completely fair conversation to have. But I'm not an artist, right? I'm solely interested in protecting my wealth and the wealth of my people and my community. And so for that, Bitcoin is the only choice. And for him to fail to see that, it just looks at to his own kind of interest in all of this. Their sole responsibility is to print the dollar, right? So when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Absolutely. And there was part of this too yesterday on Twitter talking about I think you pronounce his name Hinoch Precise,
Yeah,
talking about Safeteen's quote, domestic hard money is easy money for foreigners, and was being driven out by foreign hard money, which allowed foreigners to control and own increasing quantities of the capital and resources of China and India. That was the specific portion of Safeteen's book, The Bitcoin Standard, about why Europeans were dominating, those particular countries. But it's this idea of, hey, we can print this dollar that has this special status, and it can flood markets, and it drives out the local
absolutely,
money,
absolutely.
or requires authorities to exchange at rates that are not favorable to the people. And so, yeah, I think there's this problem, like when you're swimming in when you're a fish and swimming in water, you ask what water, right? Like it's just where you are. So, do you think that's part of the issue as well? Is of that you don't know where they haven't been there, they haven't
Yeah,
seen
they,
it.
they haven't been there, they haven't seen it. I mean, it really only takes, like, I think it's probably been a matter of a few days or weeks since we met online, right? So you hit me up on Twitter, you say, hey, look, I'm following your conversation, what's going on? And a few days later, we're speaking, almost face to face, right? And,
Yeah,
anyone at the Fed can easily do this, right? They could easily hop on a clubhouse room and say, okay, why are you guys using Bitcoin, right? Why does this make sense? Why, and they would hear, because you print too much dollar, because we've lost faith, because you spend trillions on a war, right? And so if they're looking for honest commentary, you know, they can find it, right? But I think they're not willing to be honest. I think the better type of media is kind of your type of media, right? Where you're just simply having a conversation. Like I didn't have to dress up in a suit. I'm, wearing my local Ethiopian, dress, and so are you, you know. So we're just kind of, speaking very frankly, right? Because and I feel like that is what kind of an Austrian would do, right? We're very practical people, right? We talk about X, Y, and Z, right? Us and freedom and how it relates to the world, and how we can secure our world and secure our values, right? Real conversations that people have, not, oh, what's the monetary X, Y, and Z of this trade tariff going to this carbon credit, like that's all academic fluff. Like I've made, enemies out of many professors and mentors, but I hate to say it and be the little kid to tell them, but a lot of that has no value, right? Beyond that ecosystem that they've built, right, of academia or endowment funds of Johns Hopkins, right? But really, that has no tangible, mapped, value, right? I can't eat that, right? You can't eat your Keynesian kind of philosophy. I can prove this, right? Because it just doesn't apply. You can think about it and you can write on your, blackboards all you want, but then the moment I go back to Detroit or the moment I go to Addis Ababa, there's a problem, right? There's an IMF in the middle. There's an EU with some, whacked out export law. There's, an African Union that's, there's meddling coming from all sides, right? It's not just the Americans, although I want to make it a point that, Steve Hanke and Samantha Power and, all of these people, they're nefarious actors. So they're not coming at this from a holistic point of view. They definitely haven't taken the time to meet me, yet they feel they can make decisions on our monetary value as well as our human value.
Wow, that's a powerful point. Yeah, and so when we think through this, then it's not just Bitcoin; it's Lightning Network that has really uh, kind of initiated this innovation where you can take you can have people working for you back in Ethiopia, right? And you can take an open source Lightning wallet and you can send something that's going to instantly show up in their wallets. You talk about like your economic theory isn't going to feed me, but guess what? My work for Cal, like I'm eating in the next second if I need to,
Yeah,
through that.
yeah. I
So
mean, the Lightning Network is, yeah. I'm sorry. I'll let you finish the question.
no, you go ahead.
No, 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 please, please. I'm sorry. I'm just because you get me fired up, when you're talking about lightning in Africa. But no,
Let's roll with you getting fired up, man. You got fired up about something. Let's roll there. Come
yeah,
on.
so yeah. So it was reminding me. So when you said lightning, it reminded me of. So this weekend there was a PlebFi, it was kind of a developer conference in Austin, and very technical, and I understood like 1% of it, if that, right? And Buck from Unchained Capital, and there are all these kind of people building on top of it, right? And so these are the tools that I'm using, right? And so everything on the Lightning network layer too. And it's really funny because I had a chance to hear someone speak. His name is Roast Beef, and Olav.
Yeah.
He's doing amazing things at Lightning Labs, and I kind of took for granted that he's Nigerian, like it's a Nigerian name, right? But it just didn't click until I saw him, and then because partly because his screen name is roast beef, right? I
Right.
didn't put the two together, and then I saw him there at the event, and it was such a cool thing to see how everything was kind of fitting together. It's like, oh, of course it makes sense. He's Nigerian diaspora probably, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I look at the Lightning Network, and yeah, it's just been amazing to see all of the dots connect. But no, yeah, it was a good weekend. It was a good event, and I was only there for a short bit, but I learned a lot.
Nice. Well, roast beef's definitely one I want to have on this podcast because he too is changing the tide. I'm just afraid I won't be able to keep up with him, man. That guy moves a mile a minute.
Yeah, 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 and yeah, me too. I was there at the conference purely to just support and see the community, and I kind of want to see where everything is, because open source, you can't really, nail it down. So, because there are different kind of forks and movements of all of these ideas, and the code is there for anybody to see, really. So, but these are the guys and girls, tinkering with it, and yeah, it's that mycelia effect, right? So, the mushrooms are budding, and then the spores go off and die, and they're reborn, and yeah, it was like, of course, the some of the leading not only kind of value drivers and business people and marketeers, but also the programmers are African, so that really kind of like made my day.
That's such a cool concept, and maybe just that the fact that you know America has been a land of opportunity in the past. Like it's so funny that it is becoming this just playground for people from other parts of the world that come here, realize what the problems were, the reason why they left, and now they're building the solutions for it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and
What an
it,
incredible thing.
yeah, it's that story. I mean, and I get the sense that one, they're just very humble, right? And two, they kind of want the technology to speak for itself. But the architects of Lightning and Layer Two, the ones I've met in Austin, the ones coming from all over. I mean, if you were to look at everybody's background, there is a very personal reason everybody's involved in this, right? And it's not because of money, right? A lot of these guys and girls, they could be making so much more, right? Doing something else, right? Working at some bank or some gig somewhere. But they choose to, Elizabeth Stark had said, support the billions and not the billionaires, right? It's just better use of her
Wow.
time. I mean, because I think she could probably do anything she'd like. She's a professor many times over, and Ivy League and all of those things, right? So, it's not necessarily the financial incentive that keeps everybody here. It's really this, the problems that are being solved, and yeah, the kind of that Nigerian connection has been really cool to see, and of course, diaspora and kind of the American land of freedom and liberty. They tend to kind of overwork themselves and do something, right, just because they have that freedom to work. They have the resources and the foreign currency, and the laws work for us here, and you know being an American is still a huge privilege, right? It's a great passport to have. I'm better off than so many percent of the people on the world, purely because of my passport, and that is really unfair. Like, that's I mean, I can't begin to imagine what somebody in Ethiopia feels, right, when they have an Ethiopian passport. So that means they can't open TD Ameritrade account, or a Coinbase account like that. That strikes me as really wrong. Um, so yeah, but diasporas are making the best of it.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Man, there's a whole conversation to be had just about that. It seems like.
Yeah, we can talk for hours about this. I mean, yeah, I'm yeah, and I think much like you, this kind of becomes a kind of a mission that we all have, and kind of we push towards. So, but I'm kind of interested to hear about kind of your path towards this podcast, the type of work that you do, and then yeah. So I haven't really taken time to meet you and to learn from you. So how has been your
Oh,
Bitcoin learnings?
yeah. My you can hear my kids in the background potentially, but work from home, 2021, COVID, pandemic, all that stuff. Yeah, it really started, I think, when I read a book called In the Fed back in 2009 by who was then a representative, Ron Paul, but basically explaining how this Federal Reserve Bank works. and you know, uh, what exactly it does that we know about. Because in part of the book is there's this whole thing we don't know about, which is why we should audit the Fed. And of course, they said, no, 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 no. You
Yeah,
know
and
you're
they don't want to be audited.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you know you're getting somewhere if you have this like, no, 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 you don't need to look into any of our activities. And so that kind of was kind of the first flicker, and it actually led me down the kind of gold silver path. And so it was a little bit of a gold bug there for a
you're a
while.
gold bug.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice,
Well,
nice.
and then I started moving into the technology realm at a company called Subsplash. And so we provide software primarily for churches, but it works for almost any nonprofit. And it's basically software to engage, your congregation. And over the past year, that's been a huge that's been a huge thing that they've needed. And so it's been, business has been good in that sense. But part of it is the financial side. So, taking tithes, offerings, donations, and that sort of thing. For churches, I learned the digital side of that in the legacy system. And so that was about the time when I read the white paper the first time. But literally, the funny story is, it was, I think, my birthday, 2015 or 2016. No, it was 2016, my birthday. Um, and I get $10 worth of Bitcoin, and I just kind of looked at it. It was a Coinbase send, like those referrals where you could like send $10 worth of Bitcoin to a friend. And I was like, oh, that's cool, whatever. Fast forward to like mid 2017, which is really when I read the white paper, and it just clicked. It was like, oh my gosh, credit debit cards, trusted third parties, like the ability to censor transactions. And then here's this open system that's, basically transferring like almost immutable, uh, impossible to inflate and devalue money without permission from someone, without having to be like, hey, bank, can I spend $5,000 on this new thing? Bitcoin don't care, you know?
Yeah.
And but immediately, I mean, going back to my Teach for America story, I'm put in this public, well, it was a charter school in South Los Angeles, and I just see that the consequences of not just Fed policies, but things like the federal, state, and local enforcement of segregation, throughout the 1900s. And you just see these failed, like, in a way, evil policies, not in a way that they really are evil policies that have real world effects on people's standard of living. And so that just set me on this quest to figure out, okay, I know what Bitcoin is, and I kind of looked into some others, and I thought to myself, those aren't Bitcoin. those are not Bitcoin. And so for me, part of this podcast is figuring out, hey, who's out there changing the tide? Because I see Bitcoin as very much a force of gravity. Like, it's just a law that you can't escape. So I like the mycelium idea. I've read a little bit into that. The way I'm taking it for this podcast is tides change because of the force of gravity. And so we're seeing a financial tide changing because there's this force that's coming that no one can escape.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so let's get out at the forefront to people who have seen that force, and they're trying to ride that wave, and into this new, I guess, just financial paradigm.
Yeah.
And for me, I've been driven so much by people like Jack Mallers, Jack Dorsey, Elizabeth Stark, Roast Beef. There's a whole list of names, but what really seems to fire them up, and it's the same thing that fires me up, is how can we extend this ability for people to, let's just start basic level, like have a life where they can actually plan for the future, where it's not like the daily grind, right? And so I see people who a billionaire who's for the billions in Jack Dorsey. I don't know him personally, but from what I see, his tweet storms are legit. His public messaging, the things he's doing at Square. I mean, Jack Mallers, my goodness, that guy went from, creating a Zap wallet to influencing El Salvador to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, and we're going to see that here in a couple weeks. Elizabeth Stark leaves like academia at some of the highest levels and says, "Hey, I'm bringing this to the billions." So really, that's my mission with this podcast, and why when I saw some of your tweets, I was like, I got to have Cal on here and just talk about like what's it like, because here's this, for lack of a better word, white guy from the Midwest who's had a pretty cush like life overall. I mean, everyone has struggles, but
Well,
let's
Arsenal
just say
fans
there
have
haven't been.
struggled, so you're okay. You're okay. You've had your burdens.
Hey, and at least I can be, I'm showing 2 days after getting, stomped on that I'm still a fan. So, but overall, it's like, there are these struggles that in some places have been unintentional and others have been intentional, that have been placed in front of people, oftentimes in terms of monetary policy. So that's kind of really what fires me up. So I've had this smile on this whole time hearing you talk about, hey, I'm injecting this force of gravity back into my homeland, and let's see where we are in a year or
Yeah,
two, right?
absolutely. It's that gravity is I think it's just natural too, right? Whether I'm around or not, it's gonna happen. It's just gonna happen through different means and people, and also, the Ethiopia case is significant for me and so personal to me, because it's quite obvious that I am not a fan of communism, right? And people have kind of erupted on that tweet of kind of saying, oh, well, how does this, fix human nature and all of these things? And I'm welcome to have kind of those moral questions of why we should separate state and money. But also, it's a very interesting thing, because I think Alex Gladstein, he wrote about Cuba recently. And he was actually surprised to learn that, of course, the capitalists in Cuba are using Bitcoin, right? Now, but also he learned that the communists, right, in Cuba are using Bitcoin, right? It's purely works. Like, it's a better store of value. So although, even if you're, kind of taking that for the state, right, and doing um, some kind of state led things with that, and it's not for the people, the state still wants to retain its value, right? So it is for enemies, it is for your friends. It just kind of, it works. Although I come at it from a purely, Austrian libertarian, you know, Ron Paul kind of perspective. I am a non-interventionist in almost every realm. So for me, it really makes sense on those fronts. But the principle is like, do your own research. So you might find other parallels, and you know, God bless you. Like, if you find a thesis, right? Because it's an entirely new phenomenon, and we haven't had the tides shift this way. I think the old ways of looking at things are completely over, and so even bringing up Keynesian, I mean, I think it's going to be done less and less so, right? And I think on our part, right? I think we understand it. We are like infatuated with it, and so it just becomes a process of teaching, right? And you're advising, and it's funny, you mentioned kind of that your advisory and kind of the church group, and kind of that community. My nieces go to a Catholic school, and they were invited to some event here, and it was like a swimming pool event, and the lifeguards, at the door, when they were taking money, they were only taking cash and check, right? And so my niece, being brilliant, she said, we're living in a world where people are taking Bitcoin, right? And so she kind of erupts, and she tells them they should adapt, and so so now she's teaching her peers, right, about Bitcoin. But This is a 6-year-old doing that, right? Or I'm sorry, a sixth grader doing that. So if you
Yeah.
have, young people learn it quite quickly, see how it retains value, right? See that it works, right? And then say like, okay, this is actually a little QR in my code would be a lot easier than having to write a check, right? I mean, from what I understand, the lifeguard honestly asked her for a check, which blows my mind. Like, what century are we living in, and so, and it goes back to kind of the whole thing of like you have a digital realm and how do you bring value into the real world, right? And so capturing and generating and storing that energy is the only way to like build that territory map. And also I read something a long time ago. I need to verify if it's true, but that the amount of sats in the system, so 21 million times 100 million, equals the square meters, the surface area of the world, right? So the idea is each square meter of the
Whoa.
world should get one sat, and that's why 21 million sats was kind of that's why they landed on that number and not 31 million sats, or because the denominator doesn't work when
Interesting.
the above number is infinity. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that's a fact. I want to look into it, but I like thinking of it
Yeah.
as fact because it just kind of like puts a great mental model in my head that you have the world. It's full of surface, right? I mean, water and Ethiopia and America and China, like it's just surface, right? And you can generate
Yep.
energy, you can grow agriculture, you can live on it, you can mine it, so it changes the conversation completely. And then when you assign one sat of value, right, and one sat equals one sat, one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin, it really democratizes and builds a more egalitarian future. And some people fight me on that all day on Twitter, and I'm very like I can be combative on Twitter. So I'm sorry to anybody that I yell at. Like that's just that's me on Twitter. So I'm much nicer on video. So I'm sorry to anybody that I yelled at. But my point stands. Bitcoin is the standard, the best standard, and and yeah, you can fight me on that.
Hey, quick question, kind of to end it. When it comes to Bitcoin in Ethiopia, what are maybe the top two or three things that you feel like need to happen next for it really to start proliferating and changing the tide there?
So exactly what you saw with Hanok Precise, right? Because he's like a superstar consultant in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, right?
Okay.
And a year ago, he probably wasn't looking at it through the same lens, right? Or looking deeply into the kind of beneficiaries and kind of the economics of it all and the scarcity principle and all of that. So learning, right? Keep learning, and then I think on the government side, they're going to have to do something, right? So release a law, talk about it, regulate. I mean, I'm not a government guy, but I'm assuming they'll have their own response. Um, and then the free market will have its own response, right? So again, everyone, be legal, right? I'm not going to push anybody to do anything illegal. Whatever country you're in, respect your laws. But as an Ethiopian diaspora, I am going to make a lot of noise about it. I'm going to own it. I'm going to hold it. I'm going to, respectfully pay people in it, or at least enough to learn that kind of 10-cent transaction. The
Hmm.
goal within 1 year, so September 2022, is to have 10,000 people onboarded into Lightning. So, kind of an invoice system. They set up a wallet, you know, they show me that it works, and they're done. They've graduated. Like they have enough skill to retain their value, right, or send value, or receive value. So that's really my intent in all of this. Where the Ethiopian government goes, that's up to the powerful people. I'm a simple a plebe, right? So you know, what they do with it, that's on them. But I think that for the people, I think it's quite clear what they need to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Who knows? You might be the one of the small group like the Bitcoin Beach folks, Jack Mahler's, some of the Salvadorans on ground who showed their government what was possible, and now look where we are. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, and this is a tool for states too, right? I mean, I met a gentleman on Twitter. I think he's from Germany, or maybe I'm getting the wrong country wrong, but in that area. And you know, he was talking about how Bitcoin is a tool for states and governments, and he's kind of advising, you know, very high level policy people, you know,
wow.
the World Bank level and IMF people, what it is and how to use it and how it can benefit and all of these things. So I was just like, wow, I didn't know you guys existed, you know, but purely because, you know, you have people within government, they're interested in it. You have communists, as much as, you know, I can't see a worldview that aligns with their values in life, still they're using it. And then me as a, you know, just the way I was brought and raised in America, cutthroat capitalist, right? And I value it, right? It works for me. So and from a humanitarian perspective, right? So if you look at Alex Gladstein and the work he's doing, he's like, look, if this is the difference between you know, life and liberty or not, like there's a you know, a humanitarian question here. So look at it from any perspective, it works. Um, and then people that really are downplaying it and being negative haven't looked into it. So it's just a matter of them looking into it and then building their own conclusions. But they're generally positive.
Yeah. Well, I think I love what I love is, from what I know of Ethiopian history and that sort of thing. You were talking about um, just the idea of like we got some young people who work hard, and I think there's this kind of spirit from what I can tell of. Funny enough, I was even watching your One Love Bitcoin episode with Dredd over at Swan the other day, and he talked about how like Jamaicans almost see Ethiopia as like the place, like the promised land in a way. And like you look at the history, at least of what I know. I mean, I serve churches and that sort of thing in my day-to-day job, and I know about the Ethiopian church goes all the way back to the beginning, and like the craftsmanship of some of those churches that are like built into the rock, like you go down into it and you fly over it and you can see like the architecture is just incredible. And so to think about just equipping like this next generation of Ethiopians with this tool that will just bring even more of just that craftsmanship, that innovation, that spirit from the Ethiopian people is pretty exciting.
Absolutely.
So
So much history there. And, you know, I think you probably know more of this history than I do, but, you know, it's kind of that biblical history is amazing. And then that history of kind of self-reliance and sovereignty. And, you know, of course, Ethiopia doesn't have the same constitution and the same Bill of Rights and the same freedoms that Americans have. You know, we don't have that immaculate conception, right? So, you know, your history is purely just you know, based on some, you know, kind of manifest destiny and all of these things. In the Ethiopian sense, it's built off of how do we keep these people away, right? So Ethiopia's kind of been like this beautiful beacon, right, for religious reasons and whatnot, and it's kind of highlands, and our leaders have for, you know, centuries kind of staving off, you know, kind of the enemies. And so you can go into the British histories, the Italian histories. You know, we've had emperors, you know, as say Tedros, you know, commit suicide instead of being taken as a prisoner, right? Which shows you how bold
wow,
our spirit is, right? I mean, these are people that, you know, will be fasting 1 minute, right? Very holy and religious and clean. And then we'll eat red meat the next, right? I mean, just raw meat. I do this too, right? I mean, I think it's quite healthy and good for your system. But so our people are pretty legit. So we're warriors.
Yeah.
We're not going to go anywhere. We're very strong. We're not upsetted easily. We still haven't joined the World Trade Organization, so that tells you just how committed we are to sovereignty. Like we rather be poor and free, right? Than a pawn for another state. So our people and our history, I think, get what's going on here.
Man, you guys are primed for Bitcoin carnivory and for Bitcoin itself.
We're the ultimate Bitcoiners. All Ethiopians are Bitcoiners. They just don't know it yet.
They don't know it yet. Oh man, that's so cool. Well, hey, where can people follow Bitcoin Burr? Where can they follow you? I want to give you a chance to
Sure.
plug
So
here.
probably Twitter is the best place to reach me. There is an Instagram dedicated to Bitcoin Burr, a Telegram group, right? So that's usually where we mobilize and onboard people through the Lightning Wallet and the invoice system. Online, so just bitcoinburr.org, email at cal@bitcoinburr.org. So I'm pretty responsive. So yeah, that's normally where you'll find me.
Well, that's awesome. Man, Cal, hopefully this is the first of many interviews on this podcast over time, and it's been so fun. Thanks for
Absolutely.
joining
Thank you
today.
for having me, John. I really appreciate you taking the time to learn about Ethiopia and give this subject a fair shake.
Oh man, yeah. Well, hey, that's part of my mission here, so I'm
Thank
excited.
you. Thank you.
All right, and viewers and listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode.